stream to our YouTube channel and will be on our website by next week. So given that, I'm going to turn it over to David and let him get started on our presentation this afternoon on Are You Ready to Start a Nonprofit? So.
All right. Well, thank you, Anita. Welcome, everybody. I'm Dave Holmes. I am with an organization called Candid. And whoops, I'm just sharing a different screen there. Let me share the correct one. There we go. This is our class today. So in the next hour, I'm going to really go over the kind of things that you would need to know if you are going to start a nonprofit, if you're thinking about it, or if you're already doing it. If you want to put in the chat where you are in the process, I'd really appreciate that, just to get a sense of what you need to know. Some of you might not even be started in doing a nonprofit. Some of you might already have your 501c3, your charitable status. Some of you might be further than that. But all of the material I'm going to be talking about is about not just starting the legal process of becoming a nonprofit, but a lot of the things that you have to think about as you're doing this. So just so you know who I am, I'm Dave Holmes. I'm the Educational Programming Manager for an organization called Candid, and I'm headquartered in our Midwest office in Cleveland. By the way, I'll send you a little survey at the end of this webinar if you would want to follow up with us and just send us your inputs. This is a different survey than whatever SCORE might share with you, so you might want to take a look at that. But if you don't know who Candid is, Candid started 5 years ago as two other organizations that had been around for a long time. Foundation Center, which is one of the parts of Candid, had been around since the 50s, collecting information on foundations and other grant makers and helping nonprofits connect up with them. So we have a tool called Foundation Directory, which helps you search for finding grants for your organization. And 5 years ago, we partnered with another organization that's been around for a long time called GuideStar. GuideStar's been around for about 40 years, collecting information on the nonprofit world. So if you are a 501c3 nonprofit or you become one, you get listed on the guidestar.org database. That's also part of Candid now. Guidestar.org database has all 1.9 million nonprofits in the United States listed on it. And it's used a lot of the times by givers, by funders. So we have a database of grants that's used by nonprofits looking for grants, and we have a database of nonprofits used by funders looking to give grants away. So that together, what we do is try to collect information and share it with everybody so that you can find out what's the most important stuff for you, how to run your organization, how to run it well, how to find funding, how to keep getting funding, how to deal with some of the changes that happen in the nonprofit world. We do this through our website, which I'll show you. It's candid.org. I'm going to show you that in just a little bit. We also do it through publications, the Foundation Directory, guidestar.org, and we try to communicate through all of our partner organizations. So we partner with a lot of libraries and regional centers for nonprofits throughout the United States and Mexico. In Greater Cleveland, we have partnerships with the Westlake Porter Public Library and the Cleveland Heights, University Heights Library. We have partnerships with Cleveland Public Library. We have partnerships that go everywhere. So if you're interested in finding out where we have a partnership, you can look up that website, candid.org/find us, and put in your zip code. And the nice thing about going to any of these partners is that you'll find people who have been trained in using our materials. And if you want to search for grants, they can help you with that. If you want to search nonprofits using GuideStar, they can help you with that too. But thank you guys for sharing. Some of you are just getting started, just started working with nonprofits. I'm hopefully going to tell you the kind of things that you need to know. And by the way, all of the resources that I'm going to be mentioning are in a handout that you're going to be sent. Also, you're going to be sent these slides, so you'll be able to connect up with them and find out more information. But please do, as we go on, if you have a question and you want to make sure it gets addressed, just drop it into the chat. And I'll pause at various times. If I see things that are in the chat, I'll try and answer them as we go on. And then at the end, I'll pause and see if there's any final questions that everybody has. This class is really to talk about how to start a nonprofit, but also the alternatives to starting a nonprofit if you feel like this is too much or you're not really sure, you're on the fence about how to do it. I'm also going to show you how to complete the nonprofit startup assessment tool. This is a free tool. By the way, all of the things I'm going to be showing you today are free. This is a free tool that you can use to decide, are you in the right place to make these decisions? Do you know enough to move forward with your nonprofit? And what don't you know that you need to get a little bit more information on? So throughout all this, there's going to be a lot of resources that I'll mention, but I'll try and show you where to get them. A lot of them are available directly through the candid.org website. So to start, I'm really going to talk about what a nonprofit organization is. So so we know what we're talking about here. This is the IRS's definition. And the IRS, in this case, these are non-taxable organizations. Nonprofit organizations are tax-exempt organizations. However, the IRS is more of an administrator of how nonprofits are run in the United States. And so they are the ones who define what they mean by a nonprofit organization. This is the definition that they have for what I'm talking about as a nonprofit and what I'm usually referring to. There's a lot of different ways you can be a nonprofit, but the one that most organizations are thinking about becoming is a public charity, a 501c3. And that 501c3 refers to a section of the tax code that talks about nonprofits. So according to the IRS, when you start a nonprofit organization, you create a business that's exclusively for one or more charitable purposes. And they define what a charity is and what's charitable. So if you're starting a for-profit business, you're not starting a charitable organization. If you're starting something like, I don't know, a gas station, that's, unless you're giving it away, unless you're making it a charitable concern where it's offering support to somebody else, then you are not starting a nonprofit. The idea with nonprofit organizations, public charities, 501c3s, is that they don't have any benefit specifically to private individuals or shareholders or private interests. The money that the organization makes can go to salaries and can go to the costs of the organization, but it all goes back to the organization or to the services the organization provides. It doesn't provide like earnings to anybody. It also, according to the IRS, does not attempt to influence legislation, which means you can advocate. You can say, I support this type of thing. I support after-school programs. I support environmental concerns. But you can't influence legislation. You can't say, please vote for this person. That's sort of the line that is drawn. So you're for public assistance, you might be for information, but you're not for lobbying. That is not allowed. There are specific things related to getting your 501c3. That is the public charity status that I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. I'll also say that for each of these steps, the Candid website has lots of information about creating, for example, a board of directors. When you get a public charity status, essentially what you're doing is creating a business that is a charitable purpose and that is structured in a way that the thing that's in charge of that thing, that entity, that business, is a board of directors. Now, sometimes that's the deciding factor for a lot of nonprofits, people who want to start a nonprofit is, well, I don't really want to have a board of directors. Well, you sort of have to. That's what makes it a public charity. It's representational from the public. And in the state of Ohio, you have to create a board of directors that has at least 3 people on it, one of which could be you, the person with the idea, the executive director, but you have to have at least 2 other people, because it can't be something that you are controlling. It is something that is controlled by a group, the board of directors. So just in going through some of these step by step, and I'll go into some more detail about some of the other parts. Once you create a board of directors and create the rules for how that board operates and how the nonprofit operates, which is the bylaws and the board policies, You have to incorporate at the state level first. And that means you go to the Secretary of State's office, and there is a nice guide that the Secretary of State of Ohio publishes that tells you about how to start a nonprofit in Ohio. You follow those directions, you pay, I think it's $99. It might have been even cheaper than that for a while, especially over during COVID times. You file incorporation with the Secretary of State and you become a nonprofit organization in the state of Ohio. However, in order to be a full-fledged 501c3, a public charity according to the federal government, and to become a tax-exempt organization, you have to then take that state incorporation and go to the IRS. And you can what you need to do is obtain an employer identification number, which is a form that you file with the IRS. And then you file what's called the 1023. And there are various versions of the 1023. There's a shorter version of the 1023. There's a longer version. And your ability to do that depends on how many assets you have, whether you file one or the other. But it is an application to become a tax-exempt organization. And there's a lot of questions and a lot of detail. And it does cost money. It can cost anywhere, from $400 up through $850. If you don't just fill this out yourself and you work with a lawyer, of course, that's going to be additional expenses. But that is the process for becoming legally a 501c3, a public charity. As I said, I'm not going to take you through the steps of this, but if you go to the IRS's website, you can find a lot of great information. And I'm just going to share real quickly the IRS's website, just so you know where to go if you want to find more information. So I'm going to show you irs.gov, and the IRS's website can be very, very complicated, but I want to just show you a little simple way to get through that. And that is the little button at the very top of irs.gov that says charities and nonprofits. This section will tell you about what you can do to file with the IRS and what you need to turn in first and what you need to do next. And my favorite part of all of this information, there's a lot of information out here, so it can be confusing. But if you want to know the process of applying for a 501c3 status with the IRS, you can click on the life cycle of exempt organizations. Life cycle of an exempt organization tells you what to do to start out, how to apply for this 501c3 status, the filings you have to do during this, and then ongoing compliance, everything you need to do for all the different steps. And there's one more thing you need to know. It's what you want to read about is the life cycle for a public charity. And here's all the step-by-step stuff. Here's information on bylaws, getting an EIN, registering for charitable solicitation, which is also required if you're going to be fundraising in your state and across the country, applying to the IRS, and all the required filings that go. One of the troubles of the IRS's website is there's so much there, and you never know. The names of the forms don't make any sense. It's not like Form 1, Form 2, Form 3. It's Publication 4220 and Publication 557. Here on this, the life cycle of a public charity, they're all in a really clear space, and the links are all there on one place. So you might want to go find this on the IRS website and bookmark it. Well, I'm going to stop that and go back to my slides, because the thing that I want to make sure you understand is that in order to be a public charity, to get grants, to get donations, and have them be tax exempt, you would go through the process of getting a 501c3. However, that is by far the most cut and dried and straightforward thing that you do when you start a nonprofit. When you're starting a nonprofit, you're also creating a business that you have to run, and that's run by you and your board of directors. So there are lots of other concerns that you have when you do this. And I'm just going to check the chat just a second here to see if there's a question. Can I put that link in the chat? I can put, yes, I can definitely put that link in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second here. Grab that link from the web page and put it in the chat. Sorry, it's a little tricky when I'm switching back and forth, but here is the link to the life cycle of a public charity. So let's go back to the slides. Part of creating a nonprofit is to go through the different things that you need to plan. And you see that all the things that are listed on the screen there are things that you need to consider when you are creating a nonprofit. So while you are in the process of getting the legal status, filing with the IRS, it's not like you don't do anything else. There are lots of other things that you have to do beforehand that you might want to make sure that you do as you're doing this, and that you're going to have to consider throughout the life cycle of your organization, throughout your organization's existence. I'm going to go through these things and hopefully you will understand them. Please do ask questions if you have a question about them. But all nonprofits, all 501c3 public charities in the United States are focused on a mission. So you would start a business and your idea might be to sell something and make a profit. With a nonprofit, the driving force of it is the mission of the organization. What is the organization set up to do? What specifically does it do on a day-to-day basis? The mission statement is what other people use to judge whether they're interested in your nonprofit or not, whether they're interested in giving you a charitable gift. Those kind of things are incredibly important to consider because that is really how your organization is judged again and again. And your mission is something that all nonprofits, all funders look at first. So the mission statement should be able to tell you or tell somebody that's looking at what you're doing, what you do daily. We provide after-school programs to children in the greater Cleveland area, is a mission statement. We ensure that no child in X neighborhood, whatever it is, goes hungry by providing school lunches and after-school snacks. That could be a mission statement. Usually they're pretty short. Usually they summarize. You could take a mission statement and say, oh, okay, I could make a nonprofit around this because it tells me what that nonprofit is going to do every day. Usually, though, there's also, not every organization has to have this, but there's a vision behind that mission. The mission tells you what you're going to do on a day-to-day basis. The vision tells you what you're going to do, what the world is going to look like if you're successful at what you do. So it's not just about feeding people. Your vision might be the long term. Our vision is a world where no child goes hungry. Our vision is a world where every child gets the educational assistance it needs. It's not going to happen tomorrow. That's not going to be a day-to-day operation, but it's what's happening in your head when you're thinking about the day-to-day. It's the vision for the future. The vision, mission and vision are all created out of the values. And that's one thing that you need to think about is that when you look at funders and when you look at an individual that's going to donate to you or a foundation that's going to give you a grant, they're not just looking at you and saying, oh, they're a nonprofit, I'm going to give you money. That's not enough. People give because they care about what you do. And what they care about isn't necessarily the mechanics of what you do. It's the values behind it. What are the things that you care about? We value the children and providing education. We make sure that every child has a book to read. We make sure that no child goes hungry. We make sure that the world is protected from the dangers of climate change. Those are values that are behind the vision and the mission of your organization. And that's really where you connect with the people that are going to donate to you because they're going to see in you somebody that's embodying their values and carrying out work that they care about. If you haven't done this, if you're in the process of starting a nonprofit, I'm not going to pause and have you do this, but it's important for everybody that's starting the nonprofit with you to be pretty clear on what is your mission, what is your vision for the future, and what values do you really embody. by doing this work. So if you haven't become and made that clear and haven't worked together to kind of create it, you should be working on that, and it should be something that you can then go into starting your organization. I have a question here. Oh, and yes, SCORE has also said that if you're going to go and file your 1023, you can certainly get assistance from your SCORE mentor. The SCORE mentors are invaluable. I don't work with people filling out that 1023 form, but they're incredibly helpful at working with you to do that. All right. So you have an idea of what you want to do. You have a pretty clear vision. You have a clear mission of your organization. But do you know the environment that you're working in? Because let's take it, for example, for the Cleveland Foundation. The Cleveland Foundation is one of the biggest funders in the world. It's one of the biggest funders in Greater Cleveland. And they get a lot of grant applications from different nonprofit organizations to give grants. One of the first things they think about when they look at your organization, they see, well, they're doing charitable work. It's good charitable work. I look at their mission and I understand what they're doing. They think about, is there any other organization that's like yours? You really need to know when you go into business as a nonprofit, what the world around you is like, what the environment that you're working in is. And essentially, are you duplicating other people's work? Who else is doing this work? And is there a model that you can follow? So maybe you're creating an organization that's similar to what another nonprofit does in another town or another city. This was very successful there. We'd like to start something very similar here. That's possible. But what you want to try to watch out for is, are you being innovative? Are you doing something that no one else is doing? Are you duplicating work that somebody's doing? There's nothing essentially wrong with being duplicative. It's a difficult word for me to say, duplicative. But you don't want to be an exact copy of another nonprofit. I had a discussion one time, I remember, with somebody who was very excited about starting a nonprofit because they had an idea that they would want to provide housing and assistance to people who had children in the hospital. They wanted to provide that kind of service to those children in a little lodging house. And they were looking for starting a nonprofit and getting grants to do it. And I said, well, how is that different from the Ronald McDonald House, for example? If you don't know the world that you're working in, there's a good chance that somebody else is going to know if there's something similar to what you're doing. So do some research, find out. And it doesn't matter necessarily that you're doing something that's similar to what somebody else is doing. If you can understand what makes you unique, what makes your particular service necessary? Well, it's very similar to the Ronald McDonald House, but they don't have a presence here. We're going to be offering this. We're going to be offering a different service that Ronald McDonald House doesn't offer. If you know who's doing work and what they're doing, you can think, how do I fit in? What's my niche within that? Environmental scan, a good place to go for an environmental scan, and I don't mention this here, but if you're looking at different nonprofits, I mentioned guidestar.org. Guidestar.org is part of Candid. You can go to guidestar.org, the website, and look up nonprofits. If you go to any of our partner libraries, you can even look up by radius and see which nonprofits are available, which are operating in your area. Another place I like to go to find out about the nonprofit environment is to go to the 211 service, what's called the First Call for Help in Greater Cleveland. First 211 or First Call for Help is a place that you go to find out more information about nonprofit services, social services. It's run through the United Way and connected throughout the country. One thing you will find out if you're doing something similar, like providing housing for veterans, for example, you can call and say, who provides housing for veterans in this zip code or this area, and find out the names of other nonprofits that are similar to yours, and look at their Facebook pages or their websites or what their presence is, and try to understand how you might be distinct from what they are. What services you're providing that might be different. So let's imagine that you're pretty clear on what you're going to be doing. Let's imagine that you understand where you're going to fit in the grand scheme of your city and the services that you're providing. Then you have to think about who's going to be doing the work. Now, as you saw at the very beginning of like starting to create a nonprofit 501(c)(3), one of the first things you have to do is assemble your board of directors. The thing about that is that it's never a one-step process because you're looking for people who are willing to volunteer and support your organization and be part of it and make decisions and help you work for the organization. A lot of the times, you don't have a big staff. You don't start off by having a lot of money to pay a lot of staff members. You might have an organization that doesn't have any paid staff at first, including you as the director, executive director, whatever role you have. And a lot of the work is done by those volunteers, board members. And by the way, nonprofit board members are not paid. They donate to the organization. They donate their time, their talent, their treasure. They're not paid. So you want to pick people and find people that are committed to what you're doing, that care about the same values and mission and vision that you have. Those are the people that are crucial. And there's a whole lot of places where you can find more information about recruiting board members. You can look to find, you can connect to volunteer service organizations like Greater Cleveland Volunteers to help you find board members. Or you can go to a website I like to recommend called boardsource.org. This is less for finding board members than for organizing your board and creating it and how to run it and how to structure it. They have lots of free information on boardsource.org. They also have great publications that give you the basic guidelines of creating a board. So if you haven't taken a look at them, I really encourage you to do that. Now, as you start your organization, you may want to see about hiring staff, but again, without finances, it's difficult to do that. Oftentimes, the person that's running the organization isn't paid all that well or isn't paid at all at first. You might have volunteers that are board members. You might have volunteers that don't have the time to spend to be part of your organization on a regular basis. Board members should be ready to commit, as I said, time, talent, a skill that they might have, like grant writing or human resources or something like that. And treasure, time, talent, and treasure is what makes a board member. But other people might be able to help you with services, like they donate some time, they donate some legal services, they donate some marketing services, maybe they'll do some printing for you. Who all is going to be helping you get this organization going while you're still in the building phase when you might not be able to hire staff? You need to think about, how is this going to operate if I can't hire people right away? One sad thing that I hear from a lot of people that are starting nonprofits is that they want a large outlay of cash, like a large grant at first. And the thing is, it doesn't usually happen that way. Without doing anything, it's very difficult to get people to give you large amounts of money to buy a building, to hire a bunch of staff. So it's really good if you can get things going, at least slowly at first, at least with the people that you already have connected to your organization. Let's see if there's a question here in the chat. Can you repeat the name of those resources again? Sure, I think we're talking about the 211 and 211 Cleveland is the website that I was talking about there. There's also guidestar.org, which is where you would look up different nonprofits. And I mentioned another great organization called Board Source to help with your board. And then there are places in Cleveland, there's a number of different ones, but one of the ones I think of when I think of finding volunteers for your organization is Greater Cleveland Volunteers. And put those all in the chat. So let's imagine you have all the people that you need and you're really ready to go. when you are making the structure of your organization, you should be very clear about what the need is in the community that you plan to fill. And of course, this was probably the driving force that helped you come up with the nonprofit in the first place, is that you had a sense of what the need is in your community. That is going to be vital because funders, when you're matching up with them, you match up with them, as I said, based on values, based on their understanding of your mission. But what you're doing when you find people to give money to you, donate to you, is you're carrying out work that they consider to be important. And the place where you meet up with them is that they see a need in the community and you see it too. When we talk about need, oftentimes when it's a nonprofit, you get kind of obsessed with your own need. I need to hire somebody. Boy, I need to have some renovations done in this building. That's not the need we're talking about, because funders do not give to you because you need money. They give to you because you address a need in the community. That's where you get grants. That's why you get donations. It's because you're doing work. You're addressing a need that they see and that other people see in the community. It's not enough to just say, well, I think there's a lot of people around here that have this problem. It's more, how do you understand this need? Are you getting feedback from people that you know? Are they telling you about what they need and what they want to accomplish? Have you looked at some of the research, the demographic research, the Census Bureau's information about your neighborhood and the kind of need that's going on in that community? The more you know about your area, the service area, when you talk about doing an environmental scan, you're looking at the other people that are doing the work in your area. But what are the people in the area really in need of? The more detail you can have on the people that you serve, the better you're going to be. Once you establish a clear idea of that need, the programs and services that your organization creates should address this need. We teach in another class, Intro to Measuring Your Impact, about getting a good sense of what your programs are going to do through using something called a logic model. I mean, if I do these programs, these changes will happen in the community. That's really the most important thing to think of when you're addressing the need is how are the programs that you were going to do make a change? What are your goals for these programs? What are your objectives, the specific measurable things you're going to try to achieve that are going to lead to these? Because that's what a funder, and I tend, as you see, I keep going back to what is a funder going to say? Because you want to be able to say to anybody who's going to give you money, donate money, send you a grant, you want to be able to say, well, these are the things that I'm doing with that money. Here are the changes that I'm making. So the more detail you have on how to design your programs and how that clearly leads to change, addressing the need in the community, the better off you're going to be. And coupled with that is how to measure it. How do you measure the success of a program? And it isn't always obvious. I mean, you can measure something by saying, well, I taught them this skill and then I tested them at the end and they learned this skill. But what other ways can you measure the success of what you're going to do? Do you have to survey people? Do you have to reach out? Sometimes it's very difficult to say, how did I measure the success of this? That's why we have intro to program measurement class that it's sometimes very difficult to conceive of what is the best way to measure it. And if you can't prove that it's done, if you're not tracking how well you're addressing the need, it's going to be difficult to prove to a funder that what you're doing is worthwhile, then they should continue to fund it. So that's something you should think about. One thing we have, and by the way, I'm going to show you the candid.org website, particularly the Candid Learning section, which has publications and information sheets on just about every term and every different thing that I'm talking about here. And I'll show you where you can find those, along with some of the startup tools that we have on there. So at the very end of this presentation, I'm going to open up that website and show you that. All right, so we've talked about planning your programs, talked about designing your organization. And I mentioned almost at the very beginning that you're going to need to try and secure funding for this organization. Most of the time, grants, though I talk a lot about grants and we have a database of grant opportunities, most of the time grants are not the first way that organizations get support. You have to, first of all, have a clear idea of what kind of money are you going to need to do the services that you want. What is your proposed budget? And if you've never done a budget before, it's a good idea to talk to other people who have done budgets about doing your program, just to make sure that you include all the things that are liable to be costs for you as you put this together. You also should have a pretty clear idea of where are all the different places that you can get your funding. Grants are usually good to help with funding, but more often than not, people get money to operate the organization early on from individual donations or from people that are paying for the services that you provide. Individual donations and people paying for services you provide tend to be the first steps in getting money. So you have a fundraising event or two, or you do a crowdfunding thing, or you do a GoFundMe and you bring in a lot of money to get your organization started. These are better ways to get things started than to say, I'm going to write a whole bunch of grant requests. Because oftentimes the foundations that are out there don't give grants to brand new organizations, or they want to wait until you have more proof. The same with government funding. You can't necessarily just sign on and say, well, I'm a new nonprofit, please give me a government contract to do work. It takes more time. You have to be more established. So think about the range of places where you could get money. That often starts with your board of directors and the people you're closely connected to. That's where the money often comes from first. We do have another class that talks about that. It's called Introduction to Fundraising Planning. Helps you decide who to target for your organization. All of these, by the way, are going to be in the Candid Learning section, and every training that I'm talking about here is free. The other thing about finances is that not only do you have to kind of get an idea of where the money is going to come from, you have to be able to keep track of it. You have to have set up some solid financial procedures and infrastructure. One of the challenges of that is that it's not a good idea for you as the executive director to be in charge of signing all the checks, writing all the checks, cashing all the checks, and accounting for all the checks. That's a good way to lead to mistakes, lead to colorful accounting. It's not standard accounting procedure. So what have you set up to make sure that that money is taken care of? And thank you. Cleveland Score also says they have a new webinar coming up on funding your nonprofit that I think that will be a really useful for anybody that's at that place. Okay, so let's imagine you have all the people that you need to run the organization. You have a clear sense of your programs and the need you're responding to. You've got a good sense of where the funding is coming from. How are you going to get the word to people? Because just existing isn't usually enough to get people to want to take advantage of your services. So think about, how do you reach the community that you want to serve? How do they know to sign up for what you're doing? How do you get the word out to people that are going to care about what you're doing? It isn't about finding the most perfect marketing plan or the best Facebook page or the killer tweet that you're doing, or whatever they call them on X now. It's about partnering. When you think about making a connection and getting the word out to people, you could build from scratch all the different people that you want to connect, and you could sign them up and send them emails and newsletters. Wouldn't it be nicer if you could partner with an organization that cares about what you care about, or cares about the people that you care about? So I'll give you an example. There was an organization I knew about that was trying to get people, elderly people in particular neighborhoods in Cleveland, to do more health checks because there was a high incidence of heart disease and problems in this neighborhood. What they did is, in order to get the word out, they partnered with places that are working with those people. So that doesn't just mean the hospital. So they talk to the people at the hospitals and they have a way of passing along information through a partnership with the hospitals. But they also partnered with churches. They partnered with barbershops. They partnered with other places that the people that are most risk in this neighborhood, where they went and where they hung out. That's marketing. That's connecting by connecting community people with other community people. And if you're both serving the same people, you should know about those organizations. That's another benefit of doing an environmental scan, is to know who else is there, who else is in your neighborhood, who's next door, what business serves the people that you are also trying to serve. Maybe you could partner with them. That might also lead to grants and other gifts. All right. So I'm overwhelming you with lots of things that you need to think about if you start a nonprofit, but there's more. Where are you going to have it? I mentioned that getting a grant to buy a building or build a building is really difficult and unlikely. So maybe you have to find a space to share. Maybe through your partnerships and collaborations, you can find a space that works for you. Maybe there's a school or a church basement or something that will provide you, someone that will provide you with a shared space. Do you need equipment? Do you need all the back office supplies and all the technology and printers and computers and whatever? Where could you get this? Where could you share this with somebody else? Maybe you need insurance. And by the way, I'm going to mention one more organization that you should keep an eye out for and take a look at their website and their resources. It's called the Ohio Association of Nonprofit Organizations, and their acronym is OANO, OANO. It's in the chat. Ohio Association of Nonprofit Organizations is a place to join to find out more things, including things like if you need insurance, where you could get insurance for your organization. And if you're serving young children, if you have something where you have to do a lot of transportation, insurance might be something that's absolutely required for what you're doing. Some other considerations, you may be hiring, you may be wanting to expand. You have to create policy manuals. You have to create a way to manage your staff. Because if you don't, you could wind up with a problem, an argument with the staff, and there's no guidelines to how that works. So human resources, hiring and firing, and the rules about that are incredibly important for any nonprofit. And if you saw that IRS website I showed you earlier, you know that the IRS requires regular reporting. Every 501c3, no matter the size, no matter how active you are, you have to report annually to the IRS. Now, you may only have to turn in a very short form if you're not doing anything, but you still have to do it. And if you don't do it, you can lose that status and go back to start, to having to reapply and file all those forms again if you don't do the reporting. So the 990s, the reports to the IRS, are required. They also have other reporting requirements in order to keep in good standing, as does the state. So you need to find out about that kind of information. So I go through all this stuff, and then I say, well, does this sound like maybe you don't want to start a nonprofit? Because sometimes that's the case after you learn how much work it is. I think people sometimes have the idea that running a nonprofit organization is not running a business, and it is running a business. And sometimes it can be a lot harder because you are thinking about all these different ways that you can raise money. It's also very rewarding. I love working for a nonprofit, but I work for a nonprofit that's been established for years, and I don't have to worry about some of the higher level stuff. Maybe in order to fulfill a need that you have, or a passion, or a value that you have, you might want to volunteer or find employment with a similar organization before you go in and start your own nonprofit. There's also the option of serving on a board. Just like if you want to get board members, you can go to Greater Cleveland Volunteers and see who wants to be a board member. You can also offer your services. You could say, I want to be on a board. You can share that information with Greater Cleveland Volunteers is another organization around town called Business Volunteers Unlimited, BVU, that provides help for that. Another option that is not starting a nonprofit is to simply keep doing services, basic grassroots services that you've organized without going through the legal elements of starting a formal business like a nonprofit and partnering with an existing nonprofit in order to make sure that you can get donations. That's called fiscal sponsorship. And it's a little bit more complicated than that. You have to really sign an agreement with whoever's a fiscal sponsor of yours that says they will be responsible for handling the finances and sharing that money with you, and you are responsible. It's very a good idea if you're going to do something like that without starting your own nonprofit to have a very formal agreement with whoever is sponsoring you. This is the definition of a fiscal sponsorship, but it can be something that is a good temporary situation. If you're starting a nonprofit, but you want to get tax exempt donations, you might have a fiscal sponsor. It's a good idea sometimes if you're just doing a project and you don't want all the hassle of starting a nonprofit and doing work. And there are a number of organizations in town, a number of national organizations like the Tides Center that provide assistance with fiscal sponsorship. A lot of the community development corporations in different neighborhoods in Cleveland will provide fiscal sponsorship, meaning they'll share their 501c3 status with you in order for you to do a project. You write the grants and the money comes through them. They may take a percentage, a lot of them do, percentage of whatever grants you get. We have lots of information on fiscal sponsorship on our website. I'll show you in just a second. Let's talk about the advantages of becoming a nonprofit. Oops, don't want to skip over those. Yes, if you start a nonprofit and you are then able to get grants and not pay specific taxes, specifically you're a tax exempt organization, and people who donate to you get a break on their taxes. So that's why you would do it. Public and private grants come through that as well. Private foundations give grants away. You can't get a grant directly to you doing something for profit. They will only be able to give for charitable purposes. And so they usually only give to 501c3 public charities. The other advantages of a nonprofit is that the structure is very formal. Who is running that organization? The board of directors. What happens if the organization, can't pay its debts and goes bankrupt? Does that mean every individual involved in the organization has to pay those debts? Well, if they've been doing their work as a good board of directors, they have limited liability and the organization itself is responsible, but the people that are part of the board are not. I'm not a lawyer or an accountant, but I can tell you that limited liability is a good advantage. You can take a chance, and if it doesn't work out, no one is going to be ruined because of that. Now, the disadvantages I talked about also cost money. Just in talking about becoming a legal nonprofit, that costs anywhere from $500 and up. That you have to pay out of pocket. You're not going to get a grant for that. There's a lot of paperwork, yearly filing. And remember, I mentioned earlier too, that board of directors that runs your organization is in charge of it. And that you are only one of, in the state of Ohio, at least 3 people that are part of that board. That means 2 people can agree on one thing and you can think something else and you have to do what they say. And those people might decide, well, maybe we don't want you as an executive director because they are running the organization, because the board is running the organization. That's perfectly fine. That's the way organizations are run. The other thing that nonprofits have that for-profit companies don't often have is scrutiny by the public. You file that 990 with the IRS, and in that 990, you have to talk about what your salaries are and how much you spend on fundraising every year. That's a public document that anyone can look at. And I don't know if you've ever heard it. around the holidays, there's always some sort of special on the radio or TV or something about where your charity dollar goes. And you see, they say, well, if you give $1 to this nonprofit, 50 cents out of every dollar goes to fundraising. And they're like, and you're like, how do they know that? Well, they know that because it's public. It's filed with the IRS, but those documents, those 990s, are public documents. You can find them on the Candid website. Anyone can look at them and know exactly how your organization is structured. So what should you do? Well, my suggestion, if you're not sure, is to take a look at some of the tools that Candid has. And what I'm going to do is bring up the Candid website, candid.org. This, by the way, is our free website, candid.org. You can go to it anytime you want. Rather than kind of like fool around and look at all the different pages, there's a little thing at the right-hand side of the top of this called Candid at a Glance. I really like this because if you click on it, it tells you where all the different parts of Candid's resources are. And the one I'm most interested in showing you today is Candid Learning. You want to go to that directly. It's learning.candid.org. I'll put that in the chat in case you want to see it. Learning. Oops, can't spell learning. Candid. This is our knowledge and information site, learning.candid.org. I mentioned a bunch of classes that we offer, and that's in the training section. If you want to know about training for a particular topic, you can look at our most popular training, our custom group training. Every training we offer, except for one, is free. The one that's not free is a 4-week, multi-week, very intense proposal writing boot camp. But everything else is free, including the intro to measuring your impact, the intro to fundraising planning, and other classes. They're offered live through webinars. They're also offered in recordings and videos and self-paced. So you can take a look there. Not sure what topics you want to learn. There's a lot in here. You can find out anywhere from starting a nonprofit to management and fundraising. But the resources section is really where we have the key information that you're going to need as a startup. There's a whole section of nonprofit startup resources. And it has, as part of that, a nonprofit startup assessment. This is a list of about 70 questions. I'm going to log into this just to show you. It's free, by the way. I'm sorry, 68 questions. It tells you, it's just basically a poll that helps you go through and see, are you ready to get started? Do you have the financial capital you need? Do you have the human capital, the social capital? There's all of these different elements that it helps you understand. So you can look and answer the questions and get recommendations. And it will tell you, green light, you're doing well. Yellow, there's things that you should learn. Red, maybe you're not quite ready. And it will tell you, based on your answers, what is good for you. This is a free resource. You can take it a number of times. You can download the answers. Nonprofit Startup Assessment is what it's called. And it's in Candid Learning in the resources section. The other thing in the nonprofit startup resources is at the bottom, resources by region. So if you're going to the state of Ohio and you want to get links to some of the best resources, there's legal resources, nonprofit organizations like Alano I mentioned, and then here at the end, startup guides, including the guides from the Secretary of State, other places where you can get assistance in what you're doing. This is all in the resources section and the nonprofit startup resources. We also have ebooks. If you're looking to create something new, if you're looking to write grants, if you're looking to understand about how to work with your board, you have all these free books that are free to download or to listen to. They're audiobooks and ebooks. And there's many, many different ones. Some of them are checked out. Some of them are available anytime. All you need to do is register on our website and you can use them totally free. Also in the resources is what's called our knowledge base. And you might not think about this one, but the knowledge base is simply the answers to the most frequently asked questions we get. So if I do fiscal sponsor and do a search here, it comes up with answers to this question. What's a fiscal sponsorship? How can I find examples of policies and procedures? And these pages have the answers to the questions along with the best websites that we know of. And they're all free resources. So I'm going to stop sharing this. I encourage you to go to Candid, learning.candid.org to find additional information. And I'm just going to finish up here with the last few slides. I showed you the nonprofit startup assessment, the results. We also have these classes and planning. We're happy to help you. And the last thing I'm going to put in chat is my email address. If you have a question about anything that I talked about today, or if you can't remember what it was, remember that you're going to get a follow-up email from SCORE with the details, the slides, and the handout for this class. But if you have a question for me, you can take a look at, this is my email address. And I'm noticing that some of the things I put in the chat may not have gotten to everybody because looks like I sent them just to the hosts and panelists. So I'm going to try and put some of those back in the chat as well. This is the life cycle of a public charity, just in case you missed that before. But look at the follow-up email. If you have any questions, if there's something that you didn't get or you wanted to learn more about, I do one-on-one appointments with people. I don't take you through and I don't help you fill out your 1023, but the SCORE can do that. But please do let us know how well we did and let me know if you need any additional help. Thank you so much for coming today.
Super.
Anything last to say there, Anita?
I do want to say, well, thank you very much, David. This is an amazingly nice overview and, well, actually not just an overview, good detail of how to go about starting a nonprofit. And I think everybody will realize it's a challenge, but it's also very rewarding. The other thing I did want to mention, in addition to a copy of the slides, we have recorded this session, and you'll get a link to the recording as well. So any of the information that's not on the slides that David talked about, you will also be able to access by viewing the presentation. So anyway, thank you all for coming. Again, David, thank